Hi guys! Welcome to Beginner Hand Embroidery. My name is Nancy. I'm going to be walking you through a bunch of different stuff that I normally teach at the library in person related to doing your own hand embroidery projects. So hand embroidery is a method of hand sewing that's mostly decorative. This is one piece that I finished recently. So there are a couple of basic supplies that you'll need. You can pick up at any crafting store. You will need a wooden embroidery hoop. Comes in two pieces, has a screw that you use to tighten and loosen it. We're going to talk about how you hoop up your fabric in just a minute. You're going to need embroidery needles. These embroidery needles are a little bit different than some quilting needles. They have a nice sharp point, and then they have a slightly larger eye to accommodate the thread that is normally used in hand embroidery. You're also going to need a small pair of scissors. These are specifically embroidery scissors, but they can be any kind, so long as they're small and have a sharp point. So if you need to cut your stitches out, you'll have an accurate point to be able to slide under the threads. And you're going to need embroidery floss. The floss that I buy the most is DMC brand. It's available at Joann's and Michael's. They come in skeins like this. Most sewing thread that you buy is just one string. You can't separate it. I'm going to cut off a piece here. Embroidery floss is actually 6 strings all twisted together. So you can see it's several strings. Now you can choose how many threads you want to work with. I usually work with 2 or 3, so I'm going to actually split this in half. So 3 in one hand and 3 in the other, and if you gently pull them apart, they do untwist. But I'm going to run it through my hands a couple times to get the twist to normalize. Okay. Now the number of strings that you choose to use affects the thickness of your line. So these lines are nice and thick. I use 3 strands of floss, a single strand of embroidery floss. It's much, much finer, but when you pull it away, it looks, if you sew them dense enough, it looks pretty solid. And we're just going to thread our needle. Okay, I've got my needle threaded. Not going to pull this end all the way down to match up with this one. Just pull 3 or 4 inches through, let it go, and fold it back against the longer strand. So you're going to have the shorter end folded on, and then a long single strand there. We're going to tie a knot on this end, on the longer end, just a single overhand knot. And I picked out a muted jewel tone rainbow for today. You can embroider on anything, but when you're just getting started, I recommend that you start with something that is solid color, a little on the light side or dark side, and has an even weave to it. It doesn't have any holes in it. It's a solid piece of fabric. We'll also need some kind of transfer tool. I'm using a Staedtler Triple-S Fineliner pen. These are water-based and will wash out with water from most quilting cottons. You can also buy specialty water-soluble markers. Okay, now that you have your tools together, the first thing you're going to want to do is pick your design. Because we're going to be learning different stitches, I would recommend for this to follow along you make a sampler. A sampler is a small piece where you do many different stitches all in one hoop. This circular design is one of my favorites. My design I want to fit inside of my hoop. I don't want it to be bigger than my hoop. I want it to fit inside because I use the hoop to finish the piece after I'm done with it. So I got myself a piece of fabric and traced the inside of this hoop. When you're tracing your design onto fabric, you want to make sure you're leaving at least an inch all the way around the outside of the hoop to give the hoop something to grab onto. If your fabric is too small for your hoop, you'll have gaps between the hoop and the fabric, and your fabric won't be held steadily. It'll shift around and it could pucker your stitches. So there's my limits. That's how big my design can be for my purposes. I'm going to do something a little bit different, and I'm going to make a smaller circle inside. I'm going to use this space around the outside to stitch my straight stitches. And then on this inside circle, I am going to split this up into quadrants. Now that we have our lines in, I'm going to do a couple notes for myself to know where I'm going. So these outside rings are going to be the line stitches, so I'm going to write lines off to the side here. I'm going to write out, so we need running stitch, backstitch, split stitch, stem stitch, and we need chain stitch. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Herringbone, feather, lazy daisy, French knots, satin stitch. So I'm going to go ahead and start with the line stitches on the outside, and then I'll kind of see where I am once I get towards the middle. This pie may end up being really, really tiny, depending on how much space I need to do these stitches. So we're going to go ahead and hoop up the fabric and get going. So when I'm hooping up my fabric, I am pulling it enough that there are no wrinkles in the fabric, but I'm not distorting the fabric at all. So when you pull on something too much, you distort the shape. If you distort your shape, that's how you end up with puckers. Okay, I'm going to pause for a second and get some needles threaded, and I will be right back. Okay, now that we've got our needles all threaded and our fabric hooped up, we're ready to start sewing. So the first stitch that we're going to do is a running stitch. So you're going to pick a point to start. Because I'm going in a circle, theoretically, I don't have to. I just have to pick any starting point. You want to start if you're doing a linear design that has a stop and an end point. You want to just start at one point and end at the other. So I'm going to start on this line, this purple one, and I'm starting with my needle underneath my fabric. So you're going to push your needle up on that line from the back to the front and pull it through until the knot on the back stops at the back of the fabric. So you have your knot with your tail. So that's step 1. Step 2 is to then pick a spot 1/4 to 1/8 of an inch away from where you came up at and push your needle back down through the fabric from the front to the back and pull through until the string lays flat on the fabric. You don't want to pull it too tight because you don't want to pucker the fabric, and you don't want to leave it too loose so that there's a loop on top of the fabric here. And then you're going to pick a spot, step 3, pick a spot 1/4 to 1/8 of an inch away from where you went down and push your needle back up from the back to the front. And then you repeat step 1 through 3 all the way down your fabric. Okay, so we have hit a point where we really only have about 5 inches of string left. I'm gonna unhook the fabric so you can see how I tie off these stitches, because these stitches are really close to the edge of the hoop, so you're not really gonna be able to see anything. Now to tie off, you want to weave your needle underneath and through the last several stitches that you made. And then you're going to loop your needle back through a stitch and leave a loop. Don't pull it all the way through. Push your needle back through that loop and pull it gently until that knot you made tightens against the stitches that you made. So once you've tied a knot, usually 1 is good. You can do 2 if you want to, if you feel more comfortable. because you don't want your pretty stitches to come out. You're going to snip your thread, and we are on to our next stitch. So backstitch. Backstitch starts the same way that running stitch does. You're going to start on the back side of your fabric, push your needle through your fabric from back to the front, pulling it until the knot on the end of your thread stops on the back of the fabric. You're going to pick a spot 1/4 to 1/8 of an inch away, push your needle down through the fabric from the front to the back, and pull until your thread lays flat on your fabric. Step 3 is the same. You're going to pick a spot 1/4 to 1/8 of an inch away, push your needle up from the front back to the front. Here's where we're going to switch directions. Remember with running stitch we went that way? With backstitch we're going to take a step back and push our needle back down through the hole that we went into with that first stitch, from the front to the back, and pull until the thread lays flat. Now that makes a solid line where the running stitch is a dashed line. Your next step is going to be just like step 3. Pick a spot 1/4 to 1/8 of an inch away, push your needle up from the back to the front, and then take a step back for step 4 and go down the hole that you went down on for the second stitch. And you repeat that all the way across. And you can make those stitches as long or as short as you want. Most of the time the goal with backstitch is to keep your stitches the same length. But don't worry about that when you're first getting started. Just getting the pattern of the stitch down is what's really important. So I don't quite like where I placed that one stitch. So because I don't like it, I'm gonna pick it out. I'm not gonna cut it out, I'm just gonna pick it out. To do this, you want to unthread your needle and use your needle to slide under that stitch and pull up, and then turn your fabric over and pull it out again, because we want to backtrack a whole stitch step. And then rethread your needle. Alright, that is one line of backstitch in orange finished. So the next stitch we're going to do is the split stitch. Yellow doesn't show up too well on this camera. So split stitch starts in the same way as both the other ones. I'll start roundabout in the same spot, pushing my needle up from the back to the front again, pulling your thread through until the knot is flush on the back of the fabric. Now we're going to go pick a spot 1/4 to 1/8 of an inch away, push your needle down through the fabric from the front to the back, and then instead of picking a spot away from where we are, push our needle up on the line that you were stitching right in the middle of that thread. So you see there's yellow on either side of my needle. So my needle goes right through the middle of that stitch, splitting it in half, and pull until the thread on the back lays flat. Now you're going to jump forward and pull until the thread lays flat on your fabric. Now we're going to split the stitch again, pushing your needle up through the middle of that stitch, yellow on one side, yellow on the other, and pull gently until everything lays flat. That gives kind of a braided appearance. You see how the running stitch and the back stitch, you can see clear defined stitches. The split stitch, you can't really see the stitches. It looks a little bit more braided. So that can give a different look to some of your stitches. Okay, I'm going to finish up that stitch off camera and I'm going to come back to you with the next one. Stitch number 4 is called the stem stitch. We're going to do that one, work it in green. And stem stitch is actually really similar to split stitch. So you're going to start as we have all along. starting from the back to the front, and then picking a spot a little ways away and pushing back down from the front to the back. But don't go all the way through. Leave a loop on top because we're going to push our needle up in the middle between those 2 points. So the point on the right, say this is point A and this is point B. Your needle's coming up at C. And the difference with this one is we're not going to push the needle through the thread. We're going to push it to one side of the thread. So I'm pushing it above the thread, and then I'm going to pull until that thread lays flat on the fabric. Okay? So it looks like a split stitch. But you can see, if I loosen this a little bit, that thread is not crossing or splitting the loop at all. It's completely separate. I'm going to pick a spot a little way away, push the needle down from the front to the back. Don't push it all the way through. Leave a loop on the top of your fabric and push your needle up at a point in between point A and point B. Make sure that your needle is coming out of the fabric, that this loop is on the same side as it was over here. So remember, I pushed my needle above the loop for this stitch. I'm going to push my needle above the loop for the next one. Kind of looks like a twist of rope or a twist of a vine. Okay, I'm going to finish up this line and then I will be right back for chain stitch. The logic behind chain stitch is a lot different than these 4 stitches. So please feel free to pause, rewind, and re-watch the video to watch me do this several times. We're going to start in the same way as we have. We're going to push our needle through from the back to the front and pull until the knot stops on the back side of your fabric. Now instead of going forward, we're going to go back down right next to that knot, right next to where we came up, as close as you can get. And this is where I find it helpful to pull over my fabric, because you see I pulled this out with it. You want to pull it back so that the knot is flush. Keep your string wrapped around your other hand and start pulling just to make sure that that knot stays where it's supposed to. Then you can flip your work back over and keep pulling on your needle until you have a small loop on top of your fabric. So I'm going to leave that loop there, pick up my hoop, and now my needle's on the back side, so I want it to be on the front side. I'm going to pick a spot a little ways away and push my needle up from the back to the front. When I do that, I'm pushing my needle through the loop. So my needle is in the middle of that loop. And then I'm going to very gently pull until that loop lays down flat on the fabric. Now to continue, you're going to push your needle right back down through, right in the middle of the loop, right next to where you came out from. So push your needle down and pull. Don't pull all the way. Remember, leave a loop on the top of your fabric. Push your needle up a little ways away from where you went down. Push the needle through the loop and pull gently. I'm going to show that to you several more times. So to start, you're pushing your needle through the fabric from the front to the back, right next to where you came out. So your needle's going through the loop that's already laid on the fabric. Pull very gently, leaving a loop on top of your fabric. Make sure that it's not twisted. So that right there, there's those two strands at the base are twisted. I want to untwist them and lay my loop very gently on the fabric. I'm going to push my needle up from the back to the front, through the loop. So see, needle is in the middle of those two strands, and pull very gently. I usually pull in the direction that the loops are traveling, just like that, to get it to lay flat. Once you hit a stopping point or you run out of string, to stop chain stitch, you're going to make what we call a tacking stitch. So if you wanted to keep going, you would push your needle through the middle of that loop. To stop, you're going to put your needle down through the fabric just outside of that loop. So you see there's a string that's going through the middle of that loop right now that's holding it down. We want to continue that way and tack it down by pushing the needle down directly outside of that loop and pulling. This will make a very tiny little line that's holding that stitch down. So I'm going to continue my chain stitch around, and then we'll move on to herringbone stitch. Alright, so there is a section of chain stitch done. So before I move on to herringbone and feather stitch, those stitches, I was initially going to do them in a circle on the inside of the blue line of chain stitch. Those stitches are really best demonstrated straight up and down, so I'm going to change my design just a little bit by using this center line as a guide to do a row of herringbone down the center and then a row of feather stitch on one side and feather stitch on the other side, just to keep it symmetrical so it looks nice. So I'm going to follow that line. When you're working herringbone, it's best to give yourself two lines. So herringbone stitch is kind of like a modified cross stitch or an uneven cross stitch. So we're going to be jumping back and forth between these two lines. So just like with all the other stitches, you're going to start with your needle on the back side of your fabric. And you're going to push your needle up at the end of the first line, right at the end. You're going to pull your thread through from the back to the front till the tail on the back stops the thread from popping out. Now we're going to jump over to this line at a diagonal. So you're going to jump over to that line and move a little ways away. So that's about 1/4 of an inch. I'm going to move a 1/4 of an inch over and push my needle down from the front to the back and pull through. And this makes a diagonal line on your fabric. Now we're going to take a step back just like in backstitch. So I'm going to take a tiny step back on that same line and push my needle up from the back to the front. So staying on the same side, pulling it through from the back to the front, and now I'm going to leapfrog across to the other line. That's a distance of about 1/4 of an inch, and pushing my needle down from the front to the back. And that is one completed herringbone stitch. Now we're going to continue. We're going to go take a step back on the same line, push your needle up from the front, back to the front, pull the thread all the way through, and now we're going to jump across to the other line, pushing it through from the front to the back. So as you can see, you're going back and forth. So like these stitches look like, so if you've ever cross stitched before, it looks like an X. Half of the cross is, the legs are longer than the other. So these two legs, this one and this one, are longer than that one and that one. So that's why I kind of think of it as a modified cross stitch. It's also helpful for this one to remember that it's a two-step process. You're going to jump across, jump back. jump across, jump back. So I'm going to continue this line all the way up. Excuse me, this line of stitches all the way up. And then we'll work on feather stitch. There's our finished row of herringbone. Now we're going to do feather stitch. Now feather stitch, like I said, it's best done in straight rows for when you're first learning, and then you can kind of learn to curve it. I find it really helpful with feather stitch to draw myself a couple of guidelines just like I did with herringbone. So there's one line, and then I'm going to do another line that's about 1/8 of an inch away from the first one, and then one more line, another 1/8 of an inch away. I'm going to repeat that on the other side so that it stays symmetrical. I've never tried something like this before, doing circles and then blocks of vertical lines, so I'm kind of excited to see how this is going to turn out. Feather stitch is easiest to work from the top down rather than from like the bottom up. So I'm going to start at the top here, and you figure out top to bottom by which way your V's are pointing. So the open side of the V's is the top, and the pointy side of the V's on feather stitch is the bottom. So for the easiest way to demonstrate this, I'm going to label this one 1, that one 2, and this one 3. So we're going to come up at line 1, pulling our thread all the way through from the back to the front till the knot stops it on the back. And then we're going to jump over to line 2, push our needle down from the front to the back, and don't pull the thread all the way through, leave a loop. So we're going to leave a loop on the front, then you're going to pick a spot halfway between lines 1 and 2 and a little bit below it. I'm going to pick right there, and then you're going to push your needle through the loop and pull your needle through from the back to the front. As you pull, you'll see it'll leave a loop on the front side of your fabric. So keep it loose, don't pull it too tight. Now we're going to jump over to line 3. So directly across from where we came up, or a little bit down, we're going to jump over to line 3 and push our needle down from the front to the back, leaving a loop on top like we did before. Now you're going to pick a spot in between lines 2 and 3 and a little bit below. So where my needle is. And I'm actually going to pull it through and catch the loop with your needle and pull. That's one feather stitch finished. So now we're going to go back over to line number 1, push our needle down from the front to the back, leaving a loop on top, picking a spot in between lines 1 and 2 and a little bit below, where my needle is, right there, and looping or catching the loop on top with your needle and pulling. Now we're going to jump back over to line number 3, push our needle down from the front to the back, leave a loop on top, push your needle up between lines 2 and 3, catch the loop with your needle, and pull. Now you can vary how this looks by how far apart those 3 lines are, how far you go down when you catch the loop. So like if you stay closer to those 2 points, it'll be shorter. If you go further away, it'll be longer. But the pattern for this, jump across, pick a space below, pull through, jump across, pick a space below, and pull. So you repeat that back and forth. So I'm going to continue working this down, and then we'll come back for French knots. There's our feather stitch done on both sides. Now, I said we were going to jump to French knots. I actually want to do Lazy Daisy first, and I'm going to do a little bit of planning for our last 3 stitches. I'm kind of liking that this feather stitch looks like a plant, so I'm going to stay with that plant theme and plan our last 3 stitches around that. Lazy daisies look literally like flowers, and that's mostly what they're used for. And to do that, I'm going to put a big dot for the center of the flower. Lazy daisy is kind of like detached chain stitch, or it's another term for it. So I want my flowers to have, we're going to start with this one, to have a bunch of petals. So I'm going to put 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, so that I'm putting 8 dots around that one. This one down here I'm going to do 5. So I'm going to do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So we're going to do the 5 petal one first, this one down here. To show you what this is going to look like when it's finished, these flowers right here are lazy daisy flowers. So you can see they have 5 petals. Basics of this stitch, you're always going to be starting on the back and pushing your needle up through the center of your flower, or on the big dot, from the back to the front, pulling your thread through until the knot stops it on the back. Now I'm going to push my needle back, just like with chain stitch, I'm going to push my needle back down as close to that knot as I can and pull it through, leaving a loop on top. So I'm going to leave my loop right there. Now I'm going to push my needle up from the back to the front at one of those points that I made. So I'm pushing my needle up right on that dot that I made, pulling my needle through and catching the loop with it, just like I do with chain stitch, and pulling gently. Now here's where you have a decision to make. As you pull, you'll see that that loop lays down on the fabric. So you can choose to leave it loose and open like that, or you can choose to pull it tighter and make it more like a line. I'm going to loosen it a little bit to make it look more like a petal. I'm actually going to have to go back over to the back and loosen it a little bit there, and then come back up to the front. There we go. So that loosened that up pretty nice. Now we want to tack down that loop, just like we do when we finish chain stitch over here. Actually, that up there. So pushing your needle down outside of the loop, as close as you can get it, and pulling that down so you have a little tack. You're going to continue like this all the way around. So we're going to come back up in the middle, and then go back down in the middle, pulling it through gently, leave a loop on top, push your needle back up at one of the petal spots. You can see my needle there, catching the loop. It's not twisted, so I can keep pulling. I like that loop nice and open, and pushing it down there. Okay, I'm going to continue with this all the way around, and I'm going to finish a couple more of these flowers. Then we're going to talk about French knots. So I decided off camera that I was going to do a sun up here. So I'm going to draw myself in a little sun to do for satin stitch. I'm just trying to get that as close to an even circle as I can. That's good enough. And then I'm going to do a little mushroom down here. So I'm going to do a little stem, and then just a cute little mushroom, the sideways little cap. For the French knots, I'm kind of trying to decide how I want to do this. I might do some just dots, random dots in orange and yellow up here and over here. So French knots are dots that look like these guys. They're different sizes because depending on the number of strings that you use in your thread will decide the size of them. So these big blue ones are 6 strings of embroidery floss, and these little pink and green ones are 2 and 3 strings of embroidery floss. Definitely recommend that folks play around with them a little bit so you can see how the size changes depending on how many threads you use. And French knots are used for a variety of things. You can use them as centers on flowers, to dot I's and J's on embroidered words, or as stars in a galaxy. I'm going to do the same thing as kind of like stars in a galaxy, but do like light particles around a sun, or at least that's the way that I'm looking at this. So you're starting with a threaded needle on the back side of your fabric, just like normal. So you're pushing your needle through a point from the back to the front. I like to set my hoop down on the table and use 2 hands to manipulate the needle and the string. So because I'm right-handed, I hold the needle in my right hand, and I'm going to hold the string in my left hand, and I'm going to pull that string not tight enough that you're warping the fabric, but just taut enough so that it's straight. And then I'm going to use the needle to wrap the string around the needle 3 times. So you should see 2 twists. Now I'm going to keep that string tight and pull my needle back towards the point where the string came out of the fabric. And I'm going to push my needle back down as close as I can get it to where that string came out. Once you have your needle in the fabric, you can let go of the needle and use that hand to lift your hoop up. Grab the needle from the other side. You're still holding this string in your left hand tight, so I haven't let go of this at all. Don't let go of that. And then pull the needle through gently until it pops to the other side, and then pull the string gently until it lays flush against the fabric. So that forms a little twist. I'm going to do that several more times. So again, starting from the back, pushing my needle up from the back to the front and pulling it through until the thread stops. Now I'm going to set my hoop down, grab the string with my left hand, pull it to your left, with the needle in your right hand, twist the needle around the string 1, 2, 3, and then keeping this left hand string pulled tight, push the needle back towards the fabric. So push and turn the needle. See how the point's going back towards the string? You want to push the needle down right where the string came out, keeping it tight with your left hand. Once the needle is in the fabric, let go of the needle, lift the hoop, find the needle on the other side of the fabric, keeping your left hand tight, gently pulling the needle through the twist and pulling the string until the knot is taut and flush to your fabric. That's French knots, so I'm going to continue to do just a couple more of those, and then we're going to come back for the satin stitch on the sun and on the mushroom. Satin stitch is a solid fill stitch. It's really, really pretty when it's worked effectively. You get that nice solid coverage. Satin stitch is worked back and forth across a area of space. So satin stitch is really best if you have a defined shape, because it's not an outline stitch or a design stitch, it's a filling stitch. So by working it back and forth, I mean you start on one side and you go onto the other. So you're going to come up from the back to the front on one side of your place that you want to do satin stitch and pull through until the needle stops, until the knot on the back stops. Then you're going to jump across to the other side of your motif, trying to keep it as parallel or as straight as possible. That's close enough. And then pulling it until the string is flush with the fabric. You don't want to pull it too tight because you'll pucker your fabric. You just want it to lay flush. Now in traditional satin stitch, you would pick a spot right next to where you went down at, kind of like we do with French knots and lazy daisy stitches. So you're going to come up from the back to the front and then go across and down on the same side that you came out from. So it's going to lay a line of string right next to where you just placed your line. And you continue like that back and forth. That's the traditional way of doing satin stitch. I have a tendency to jump around, and I'm actually going to draw myself some guidelines here so that I know I'm going straight. This can be super helpful if you are doing satin stitch across a very large area to help you keep your stitches parallel, is to draw those little lines. Now the way that I work satin stitch is to lay down my first line and then find a spot a little bit away from where the last line of thread was laid down. Usually about a 1/16 of an inch. And then go directly across. And then I'll go back to as close as I can get to that first line that I laid, and get as close as I can that way. I feel that this helps me fill in shapes more consistently and denser, so I get a better coverage with my string. These 2 or 3 strings aren't filled in as well as these ones up here. I feel that I have more control if I jump around, but you can, if you realize that you have a little bit of a hole, you can always go back in and make another pass at that shape. I like to put my needle in between the strings so I actually can see where I need to plunge my needle on the other side. And you see that laying it on top can help you fill in those gaps and keep it nice and plush. But that's pretty much it. So I'm going to fill in the rest of the chain stitch and the stem stitch and do the stems on the flowers, and then we'll be ready to wash and finish our embroidery. So after you finish an embroidery piece, I always recommend that folks wash it. And you can do this in a variety of ways. You can either throw it in the washing machine with your normal clothes. I normally use just like a small dish of water. Actually, I do this over the sink most of the time. And get it wet, put a little bit of Dawn dish soap on it, agitate it in a bowl of water, and then rinse it under cold running water. And that usually does the trick. But since I'm using a water-based pen, I wanted to try something new. This is warm water and OxyClean, or sodium percarbonate. I'm going to immerse this in the water and sodium percarbonate, and I am going to agitate it a little bit, and we're going to see if I can get the water-based marker out of here. We may have to let it soak for a while, probably 10 or 15 minutes. See how it does. You can see some of the colors coming out already of the marker because the water is turning a color. It's kind of just a little muddy. Yeah, no, it's getting there. Our embroidery is fully washed and is a little damp, so we're going to dry that off really quick. I usually set it on top of a towel, fold the towel over, roll it up, and then just squish it with my hands to draw the excess water out. And that will leave it just damp. We are going to press this piece of fabric to get all the rest of the wrinkles out. I always press from the back side so that I don't squish everything. I pulled a little too much water out, so we're going to get that a little damp. And then we're going to give that a quick press. Once your fabric is pressed, you can choose how you finish it from here. I'm going to finish mine in the hoop that I created it with. So I'm going to set this off to the side, and you're going to need 2 pieces of felt and 1 piece of cardstock. I usually use white for everything, but I think this time I'm going to use this bright green on the very back. So the 2 felt circles, I've got 1 smaller one for the inside and 1 larger one from the outside, and then this piece of cardstock is going to go in the middle. From here, we're going to make a embroidery sandwich. So you're going to put your embroidery hoop down on the table, center your fabric on top, and press the inner hoop into the outer hoop, just like you would if you were sewing. We're going to turn it over from here and make some adjustments. I adjusted everything because I want my embroidery to be as centered on the hoop as possible, and I want this piece to be as close to the top as possible, because that screw is what we're going to hang it from. And I'm just gently tugging on the fabric to pull it taut within the hoop. Remember, as always, try not to warp your fabric too much. And I'm going to give that screw one last good hard tighten. Once you're happy with how your fabric looks in the hoop, we're going to flip it upside down and, using some scissors, trim off a little bit of this excess fabric. You want to leave 1.5 to 2 inches of fabric all the way around the outside. Because we're going to tuck this into the inside of the hoop. We're all set with that. Now, set your felt circle inside, and then your cardstock circle inside of the hoop. Once those 2 circles are inside your hoop, we're going to use, this is Aleene's Fabric Fusion. You can also use tacky glue or Elmer's glue. We are going to lay down a fine line of glue across that cardstock. I'm going to go all the way around the outside as well. Now, I'm going to cut some slits in this fabric. I'm not going all the way to the hoop. I'm stopping a little distance away and cutting those slits all the way around the outside, about every 1.5 to 2 inches. Once all your slits are cut, you can fold the slits into the embroidery hoop and press them down onto the cardstock. It may also help to put a line of glue along the inside of the embroidery hoop. That fabric isn't quite sticking the way I would like it to. I'm also going to use my finger to spread that glue out as thinly as I can on the inside of the embroidery hoop. Now we're going to press the fabric around the hoop and into the inside. Now that all of our fabric is tucked into the hoop, I'm using my fingers to go around and press it into the inner hoop to make sure that it's good and stuck. Now we're going to place our larger circle on the outside, on top of all that, and press that in as well. This will stick to the glue that's on the cardstock. Then you can go back in and fill in with glue to get the felt to stick to the inside of the hoop. And I cut that green piece to the size, to the dimensions of the outside hoop, so that there would be just enough to sit nicely inside of the hoop once it's pressed into the edges. Once your felt is all glued down to the back, that is your finished embroidery. We can hang it from the screw up here on the top. I just have a small piece of ribbon. I'm going to run that through the gap at the top of the hoop, tie an overhand knot in the ribbon, and your embroidery is ready to hang and enjoy. Thank you everyone for joining me for this video. I hope that you had fun and you're ready to start your own hand embroideries. Please like the video, subscribe to the channel, check out some other content from other creators at AADL TV, and until I see you next time, have a great day. Bye!